There's a war that America fought and officially never admitted to. No declarations, no press conferences, no acknowledgement, just men climbing into small, unarmed aircraft and flying into some of the most heavily defended airspace on Earth. Men who flew without rank insignia, without military ID. Men who, if they were captured, the United States government would not claim. They were called the Ravens. And what one of them did over the plain of jars on a single afternoon should be remembered as one of the most extraordinary acts of airmanship in the history of American combat aviation. His call sign was Raven 26. He flew a Cessna, a small, single-engine, unarmed observation plane that any private pilot could rent on a Sunday afternoon. He flew it into a firestorm. His fuel line was severed by enemy fire. His cockpit was soaked in aviation fuel. He was, by any rational calculation, already dead, and he refused to leave. This is what happened on that day, and this is what it cost him. To understand what Raven 26 did, you first need to understand where he was, and why nobody was supposed to know he was there. Laos, in the late 1960s and early 1970s, was officially a neutral country. The 1962 Geneva Accords had guaranteed that neutrality, which meant that, officially, the United States had no military personnel operating inside its borders. Officially. In reality, North Vietnam had been using Laotian territory for years, running supply lines, staging troops, building the infrastructure of a war that was slowly strangling American operations in South Vietnam. The Ho Chi Minh Trail ran through Laos, the Plain of Jars, a high plateau in the northeast, named for the ancient stone vessels that dotted its landscape, had become a strategic battleground. Whoever controlled the Plain of Jars controlled the approaches to the Laotian capital. North Vietnamese forces knew this, and they held it with everything they had. America's response was a classified air campaign. Thousands of sorties, billions of dollars in ordnance, and a small, unconventional unit of Air Force pilots who were officially reassigned, stripped of their rank, their uniforms, their military identity, and placed under cover as civilian employees of the U.S. Agency for International Development. They flew out of remote dirt strips, they wore civilian clothes, they carried no military identification. If they were shot down and captured, Washington would not confirm their existence. They were called the Ravens, forward air controllers operating in a war that didn't exist, directing airstrikes in a country the United States wasn't officially fighting in. They flew small, light aircraft, the kind of planes built for observation, not combat, unarmed, slow, conspicuous. They flew low to find targets, mark them with smoke rockets, and talk jet fighters onto those targets from the air, dangerous in ways that are difficult to fully describe. The casualty rate among the Ravens was by any standard catastrophic. Raven 26 was one of them. His aircraft was a Cessna 01 Bird Dog, a two-seat, single-engine plane with a top speed of roughly 100 miles per hour. No armor, no ejection seat, no guns, a handful of white phosphorus marking rockets under the wings. That was it. That was the aircraft he flew into the Plain of Jars on the day everything went wrong. The mission began with another man going down, an OV-10 Bronco, a twin turboprop forward air control aircraft, far faster and more capable than Engel's Bird Dog, had been hit over the Plain of Jars and gone down. Its pilot was somewhere on the ground, in one of the most heavily contested stretches of terrain in Southeast Asia, surrounded by North Vietnamese positions. Alive, but not for long if nobody came. Raven 26 launched. His job was not to fight. His job was to find the downed pilot, establish radio contact, mark his position, and coordinate the rescue. Talk in the helicopters, talk in the fighter cover, keep everybody organized while the men on the ground tried to stay alive and the men in the air tried to reach them. It sounds straightforward. It was not. The Plain of Jars was not a place where North Vietnamese forces were lightly armed. These were not guerrillas with rifles. These were organized military units with heavy automatic weapons, anti-aircraft guns, and the experience of shooting down American aircraft on a regular basis. When Engel arrived over the crash site in his unarmed Cessna and began circling to locate the survivor, every gun in the area knew exactly where he was. They opened up. The Bird Dog is not a fast aircraft. You cannot jink aggressively in a plane with those flight characteristics. You cannot climb out of range of ground fire quickly. You are, when you fly low and slow over a defended position, essentially a target that announces its own location. Engel knew this. He circled anyway, because the downed pilot on the ground needed someone overhead, and leaving was not something Raven 26 was prepared to do. A round came up through the aircraft and severed the fuel line. Aviation fuel is not like gasoline from a pump. It is highly refined, highly volatile, and in the heat of an aircraft cockpit, with an engine running and the ambient temperature of Southeast Asia, it does not need a spark to become catastrophic. It needs proximity to an ignition source. It needs a hot engine. It needs friction. The cockpit of the Bird Dog was drenched. Engel was drenched. Every surface around him was saturated with a substance that, at any moment, could turn his aircraft into a fireball at low altitude over enemy territory with no ejection seat. He did not turn for home. He continued to fly low-level passes over the enemy positions. He used his white phosphorus marking rockets, the only weapons he carried, to suppress the ground fire, not destroy it, suppress it. Keep the enemy's heads down long enough for someone else to get in. He was flying a fuel-soaked, crippled aircraft at low altitude over active anti-aircraft positions, marking targets with rockets that produce a flash of white heat on impact, in a cockpit that was itself a potential explosive. Every pass he made was a calculation that he was still willing to make. The rescue helicopter was inbound. When the helicopter entered the area and began its approach to the survivor's position, the North Vietnamese opened up with everything they had: heavy automatic weapons, concentrated fire, the kind of volume that can bring down a helicopter in seconds if the aim is right, and at the speed a rescue helicopter moves during a pickup attempt. Slow, committed, unable to maneuver aggressively, the aim didn't need to be particularly good. The helicopter was about to be destroyed. Engel saw it. He understood, in the time it takes to process a situation from the air, which is not very long, what was happening and what the outcome would be if nobody changed the equation. The helicopter crew would die. The downed pilot on the ground would remain on the ground. Everyone loses. He dove his aircraft between the enemy gun positions and the helicopter. A fuel-soaked Cessna, 100 miles per hour, no armor, no guns. He placed himself and his aircraft physically between the source of the fire and the aircraft being fired upon. Not a gun run. He had nothing to shoot. Not a missile strike. He had no missiles. He used the Bird Dog itself as a shield, as a distraction, as the largest, most visible, most immediate threat he could present to the enemy gunners to pull their attention away from the helicopter and redirect it towards something they could actually see and target. It worked. The helicopter broke away safely. The crew lived. The automatic weapons that had been about to end that rescue attempt were now focused on the small, damaged, fuel-soaked Cessna that had just put itself in the middle of the engagement. He did not leave. Engel stayed over the plain of jars. He continued to direct airstrikes against the enemy positions. He talked in the fighter cover. He coordinated the suppression effort with methodical, professional precision in a crippled aircraft soaked in aviation fuel over a defended position that had already shot him once and would have fired again given the opportunity. He stayed until the guns were silenced. He stayed until the rescue helicopter came back in. He stayed until the downed pilot, the man he had come to find, the reason any of this had happened, was pulled off the ground and confirmed safe. Only then did Raven 26 turn his aircraft toward home. The Bird Dog made it back to base. A plane that should not have survived the first pass over the crash site, with a severed fuel line and a cockpit that had spent the better part of an afternoon soaked in aviation fuel, landed at a remote Laotian airstrip with its pilot inside. Alive. The Air Force Cross is the second highest military decoration the United States Air Force can award. It exists for acts of extraordinary heroism in direct combat with an enemy. The citation requires a demonstration of valor above and beyond what duty demands. It is not awarded frequently. It is not awarded lightly. Engel was awarded the Air Force Cross for what he did over the plain of jars. He received it posthumously. The secret war in Laos continued. The Ravens continued to fly. They continued to die in a conflict that the United States government declined to acknowledge, in aircraft that offered no protection, over terrain that offered no mercy. The plain of jars was bombed more heavily than almost any target in the history of aerial warfare. Villages were destroyed. Populations were displaced, and the men who flew the marking runs, who talked in the strikes, who circled at low altitude in unarmed Cessnas while the world below them tried to kill them, those men did it without recognition, without rank, without the acknowledgement of the country that sent them. The war in Laos was not declassified in any meaningful sense until years after it ended. The men who fought it received no parades. Many received no acknowledgement at all. The Ravens flew their missions and came home or didn't, and either way, Washington said nothing. Here is what you witnessed in this story. A man in an unarmed, damaged, potentially explosive aircraft chose to remain over a defended position when leaving was the rational, defensible, survivable option. Not once. He made that choice continuously, over an extended period, under fire, with the full understanding of what the fuel soaking his clothing and his cockpit represented. He dove between a helicopter and the guns trying to kill it with no weapon except the physical presence of his aircraft. He stayed until the mission was complete. He flew home in a plane that had no business flying. The plain of jars is quiet now. The stone jars are still there, scattered across a plateau that was once one of the most bombed stretches of land on Earth. Unexploded ordnance still surfaces in the soil. The secret war left marks that haven't finished appearing. Raven 26 is gone. His name is on a list that took years to become public. His award was given after he was no longer alive to receive it, for actions in a war his country officially never fought. He flew a Cessna. He had no armor. He had no guns. He had marking rockets and a radio, and the decision, made once and held under pressure for as long as it took, that the man on the ground was worth more than the risk in the cockpit. That is what Raven 26 was. That is what he did. And that is what it cost.